Greetings, my ever wonderful jelly spoons, and welcome to this week's Greetings, my ever wonderful jelly spoons, and welcome to this week's episode of Monday Madness, the Monday show where I talk to you about anything and everything. And this week, because I've been looking back over my previous videos and realised that they were all kind of dark in nature, which, you know, is my want, but also, you know, it's been kind of dark and I'd like to bring some more light and colour to this week's episode of Monday Madness, because I am quite colourful as well as dark and mysterious and terrifying. So today it is going to be bright and colourful and bouncy and all about some characters that I have played in the world of tabletop role-playing games, in the world of D&D, in the world of RP, that kind of thing. Because today's video, I've decided, is going to be about playing the tropes that you love while not making all of your characters exactly the same. So I'm going to talk about 4 to 5 different characters that I have played in various different role-playing settings, depending on the time. It'll be 4 or 5, you'll know by the end of this video. And I'm going to talk about the tropes that I always tend to use, and maybe delve into why, although that's the bit that still seems to elude me. But I'm also going to talk about how I managed to make these characters different each time, while adhering to the tropes that I love way too much. So, the 3 tropes are these. Number 1, very big, very important to me, family relationships. Now, yes, when you're creating a character's backstory, of course family is going to come into it. However, my family dynamics tend to be one of 2 things. Predominantly option number 1, which is very well bonded, happy family. Often to do with siblings or a parent and child relationship. Very happy, very well bonded, and most DMs take that and go, alright, so they're gonna die. Which is fair enough. On the opposite end of things, option number 2 is that I have a completely blown apart family, blown to smithereens, no longer speaking to each other, do not get along, but still alive. I don't tend to lean into the dead family trope, so you won't really be seeing that from me. Trope number 2 that I always use, and it took me an embarrassingly long time to realise that I do this quite a lot. Poor hygiene. I'll explain later, okay? And trope number 3 that I always tend to put into my characters is a general lack of knowledge. Either an idiocy, a naivety, or just a general lack of knowledge of anything. So there you go, those are the 3 bingo cards that you have to hit every time I'm talking about one of my characters. Number 1, family dynamic, it's either going to be amazing or absolutely terrible. Number 2, they will have poor hygiene. Again, I promise I will explain this later. And number 3, they may not be a complete moron, some of them are, but they will have a general just lack of knowledge about pretty much anything and everything that's going on around them. The first character is a character that if you have been around on my channel for a little while, you may recognise. His name is Moxie Brethren, also known as Benji Tal. And his story is a very interesting one. If you want to hear more about his story, then go onto my playlist, and I have one which is literally just the story of Moxie, and it takes you through his entire story. I do have some interesting news about Moxie. I am still working on it, so I'm not going to say too much right now, but I might be asking people to lend me their voices. That is all I'm going to say. Moxie Brethren is and forever will probably be one of my favourite characters, if not my favourite character I have ever created and played. Which is the reason why I am planning to do something else exciting with his story soon. But who is he and how does he fall into my 3 regular tropes? Also, let me know in the comments if you can spot any other tropes that I have not spotted yet. They might be little ones, so I didn't quite catch on to them, but yes, if you see any other really similar things between all these characters, please let me know, because I need to learn more about myself, it turns out. Moxie Brethren is a pirate, known as the Black Dog. The name was given to him by his father, who is known as the Black Wolf. So you can see the wolf and the dog, the father and son. They have been sailing together on his father's ship since Moxie was born. He has never known any other lifestyle. He has always been at sea. They sometimes go to port to trade, to get things, to have some time in brothels mostly, but Moxie doesn't really enjoy it. He's never travelled further inland than the port towns that they visit. He loves the sea, thinks everyone who lives on land is a complete idiot, and when circumstances arose in the various different D&D games that I played Moxie in, when he had to spend a long time on land adventuring with the party, to begin with he found it very difficult to walk. His balance was off because he was so used to always being on ships that spending that much time on land was just very confusing for him, particularly sober. Because Moxie has been on the ship with his father his entire life, he has never known or indeed met his mother, and doesn't even really think about her. No matter what D&D game I was playing Moxie in, circumstances arose, generally bad ones, and he lost his father and his ship, and had to join the adventuring party and go adventuring. This meant he spent a lot of time on land, which was a world that he knew nothing about and didn't care particularly about. And this meant that not only was he finding his literal balance, he was also discovering how to exist in this world. Sometime after the loss of his father and his ship and the crew and his entire world, while Moxie was adventuring with these various different adventuring parties, in several circumstances, the DM decided to bring his mother in. And so a big plot point for Moxie's story, regardless of who I was playing him with, was his mother showing back up again. And because Moxie was a tiefling and his father sometimes was and sometimes wasn't, depending on the story, his mother was very often some sort of demon or devil. And every single time, Moxie ended up falling for his mother's tricks and charms. This was where I started to explore quite an interesting part of Moxie's personality that I hadn't really considered before while writing and creating him. He wasn't unintelligent. His father had taught him well. He was an excellent pirate. He was great at negotiations for treasure and gold. He was good at treasure hunting and maps and locating things, knowing how to fight, how to get himself out of difficult situations, how to evade the law for as long as physically possible. But in terms of being tricked, betrayed, and lied to, he didn't have a lot of experience with that. Moxie had always sailed under his father, who was a fearsome pirate and a beloved captain. No one had ever particularly tried to overthrow his father, or if they hadn't done it successfully. And the more I delved into it, the more I realized that Moxie dealt in truths. They were harsh sometimes, but they were truths nonetheless. How he felt with his father had always been truthful and honest. What they did was always honest. They were killing people, they were pirates, they were going to steal from people. And while in those circumstances, Moxie did see people try to escape or try to lie and cheat their way out of things, really, Moxie's biggest experience with lying and cheating was probably in games of cards that he played with the crew. And so when this person showed up, who was very obviously his mother, there were various different ways that she could prove it in the different games that I played, he had no reason not to believe what she said. He wasn't even rolling for insight, he was just believing her, because the only relationship he had had with a parental figure was his father, who would never lie to him, and had never, as far as Moxie knew, lied to him. Therefore, why would his mother be any different? Plus, everything that she's saying was good. You know that saying that people will believe anything as long as it's a compliment? Well, yeah, that's pretty true in terms of Moxie. So he believed his mother and allowed himself to be led down this very bad path. And ultimately, his mother demanded a test from Moxie, and she said that he had to prove himself worthy of being essentially the right hand of this god. She was convincing him that he could be the champion of this deity, and he was believing her and felt very powerless. She played on that a lot. Moxie, it turned out, felt very powerless, particularly on land, because he was out of his element and only knew fighting as a pirate. But while fighting on land, he didn't have cannons, he didn't have a crew to rely on, he just had the few people in the D&D party adventuring with him. He didn't have his father, he didn't have any of the things that he normally could do, he just had his swords and his wits. And compared to all these people around him with magic and healing and all these wonderful things, he felt very out of his depth and like he couldn't contribute very much. So when his mother shows up offering him this deity deal where he can be given powers and magic and strength, of course he took it. The ending of his story was different depending on the different campaigns I played him in. The main one that I talk about is the one where he ended up being an Oathbreaker 3 times. He did not have a good run-in with the gods, poor Moxie, because again, it was a world he didn't understand, the world of deities and how you interact with them and their magic and things. He just didn't get along with it, and he didn't realise when he was doing things wrong, and sometimes the deities weren't very communicative with him, and sometimes they were talking to him but he wasn't understanding them. And yeah, his story ultimately in most of the games had a happy ending, but he did have to go through a lot of struggles and strife while that was all happening. But predominantly, he did have a happy ending most of the time. And in the story I'm writing about him, he will probably have a happy ending as well, but no promises. Kuri was the next D&D character that I played after having played a huge couple of stints as Moxie. I am usually a forever DM, and the fact that I very rarely get to play characters at all is probably part of the reason why I lean into tropes when I do, because it's so rare, I immediately just go for my favourite things and chuck them all onto characters. So Kuri is very similar to Moxie, because yeah, I've been forever DMing in the time in between, and therefore just really wanted to play Moxie again, but I had played him a few times and therefore wanted to play someone slightly different. So enter Kuri Muster. Let's play Spot the Difference, shall we? First off, well done me, I did not play a Tiefling again. Kuri instead was a drow. Kuri Muster was a pirate who lived on the sea, on a ship, with his father, who was the captain, who he had been living with on the ship, on the sea, for as long as he had been alive. Kuri had a huge long braid of white tangled hair that he never really brushed and just kept growing out. Kuri was of the belief that as long as you dived into the sea and had a swim every few days, you were perfectly clean and that was all that you needed. And whenever he spent any amount of time on the land, he always wanted to smell like the salt water so that he could still smell like home. It was very important to him in ways that even he didn't really realise. So he always, smelled quite bad. In the one and only campaign where I've ever got to play Kuri, it actually started on a beach. Kuri was spending a lot of time on this island. He had been dropped off by his father. He was going to pick him up later on, and Kuri was exploring, getting to know the place, getting in lots of trouble. And through a series of adventures and mishaps, he met the party, and they became the adventuring party and formed together. They had to battle some creatures, various different things like that. Now, Kuri, being a drow, had actually been alive for about 100-ish years, but mentally and physically was about 17 in human years. So that was an interesting dynamic to play when the rest of the party realised, wait, you're a literal child, but you're older than most of us. What? That was quite fun. And Kuri was very egotistical. He would tell anybody and everybody that he was a pirate. He would tell everyone who his father was, because this name came with reputation, and the reputation was sometimes awestruck and inspiring, and sometimes fear and terror-inducing, and Kuri did not care which one it was. And as time went on, the party spent quite a lot of time convincing Kuri not to tell people that he was a pirate, or the son of this particular pirate, because that could get him and them into quite a lot of trouble. And it was a very difficult thing for him to not tell people. He was showing off, essentially, like, I'm the son of this pirate, I'm friggin' awesome. And while the party did get to bond and get friendly and know each other and, form a strong bond and connection, the side of Kuri that the party got to know in that time was very egotistical, very, I'm a pirate, I'm amazing, whatever, you guys live on land, you're rubbish. He flirted with pretty much any attractive woman that he would see. Very deliberately did not flirt with the men, though, despite clearly liking them, and that was a thing that came up later on. But the tables turned entirely when they met Kuri's father. Now, his father had been coming back to collect Kuri, and it turned out that he and his ship arrived at a very important moment when the party was in the middle of potentially getting swindled out of some treasure by this other person and potentially being killed. His father's ship showed up, cannons blasted, blew them all to heck. Like, they got out of the situation. It was amazing. So the party immediately was like, oh, thank God. And Kuri immediately recognizes the ship and is like, oh, this is my ship. Oh my God, you're going to meet my dad. He's so freaking awesome. And then everything changed as soon as they got onto the deck of that ship and Kuri saw his father. This egotistical, cocky little shithead immediately upon seeing his father turned into a child. And he ran all the way up to his father shouting, Dad! And his dad, played wonderfully by the DM, was shouting, oh, that's my lad! And Kuri jump hugged him and was spun round and round in a circle by his father. This dread pirate who is feared by many people and has a terrible, fearsome reputation, who's just spinning his 17-year-old son round and round, being like, my boy, I missed you. And Kuri's like, Dad! And immediately the party's like, what the fuck? And they got to see the other side of Kuri, which is, I'm such a daddy's boy, I love my dad, And he basically turned into like an 8-year-old. I really enjoyed playing that. Whenever the party met Kuri's father over the course of their campaign, anytime he saw him, he would run, jump hug, and immediately tell his dad everything that had been going on. And sometimes when he was having a huge existential crisis, which happened a few times, particularly over his sexuality, he was coming to terms with that, he would speak to his father privately about that. They got a lot of very tender, sweet moments where his father was going like, son, just be you, it's fine, kind of thing. And his father was always very loving, very supportive, which is something I think everybody needs in their life. And that was a hugely important dynamic for me, but it was so funny the first time because I knew how he would change when he met his father, but none of the rest of the party members knew, and it was absolutely hilarious. They were just watching this arrogant asshole turn into a literal child, and they thought it was hilarious, and I thought it was hilarious, but more than that, it was very sweet. And because Kuri, unlike Moxie, didn't lose his father, Kuri got to experience that relationship throughout the whole story, and his father was still there at the end, and the game wrapped up. His father was still there, and that dynamic had, changed a little bit, but ultimately it was still there, and it was very exciting to lean on that and get to have that relationship all the way through. Kuri was also great fun to play because over the course of the adventures of the story, he was predominantly on land, so similar to Moxie, very out of his element, didn't really know what he was doing. However, where Moxie found himself feeling powerless and relying on his mother and the lies that she was spinning to him, Kuri was excited about it, while also thinking everything was ridiculous. He would look around at the houses and the towns and the big cities and just be like, why would anyone choose to live here when you could be on a ship? But he did think it was fascinating and hilarious. And Kuri also famously had no idea what a cow was and did not believe that they were real. He did not know that was where milk came from, and the party had to show him a cow, which was a whole thing. That was like a whole subplot. It was great. Also, Kuri, while being very flirtatious and occasionally going to brothels and doing the thing, he was very naive about the birds and the bees. He had not had that talk. He did not really want to know much about it. Wasn't particularly interested, and again, lack of the mother, hadn't really thought about it before, and that was another interesting aspect of the story which came out at some point while we were RPing, and Kuri was just like, what? Huh? What do you mean? And yeah, that was entertaining and fun. Oh, and lastly, one very important part of Kuri's story, which is totally important and not just funny. The party at one point were travelling through a market town. They were on their way to go and fight a big bad evil guy and all these various things. And Kuri found a vendor who was selling guinea pigs. And Kuri had never seen a guinea pig before and just thought they were the cutest things ever. They were just balls of fluff with eyes. And he thought they were the best thing ever. And he really wanted one. Unfortunately, he didn't have a lot of money. And the rest of the party were saying to him, dude, we are about to go and fight a big bad evil guy. Like, this isn't a safe place to bring a guinea pig. It'll probably get killed or lost or die, you know, and that'll make you sad. So put it back, and maybe in the future you can have a guinea pig. And Kuri was very sad about it and reluctantly left all the guinea pigs behind in the town and was very, very sad. So another wonderful member of the party took it upon themselves to find him a toy guinea pig. And Kuri was gifted with this toy guinea pig to be his pet. But Kuri was never taught how to read or write, and therefore words are difficult for him sometimes. And so he named his pet guinea pig Pinnygig, and he had him forever. The next one of my characters that I'm going to talk about is named Jimmy Watkins. He was nicknamed Watts, and he was a time. I have some quotes from him from my notes from the game that we played. Quotes. Fuck Nugget. You couldn't ignore me if you tried. Are you lost? And this next one he said a few times, and if you can tell me where the quote is from, bonus points down in the comment section. Jimmy would say, great, then we can hold hands and skip afterwards. So Jimmy was a character I played in a Monster of the Week game. So Jimmy was in fact a human, which is very unusual for me. I do not normally play humans. I like to steer clear of them in my fantasy worlds, but in this case I was playing a human. I'm just going to read you the character sheet now because I've still got it in front of me. He was a 19-year-old human boy. He had hard eyes, was wearing streetwear. He was a hoodlum who was a driver, so he was very good at driving and could hotline anything, and owned 2 vehicles which were left around the city. Jimmy also had an ongoing hate-filled relationship on his side with a police detective, and she was desperately trying to be a good role model for Jimmy. She had given him chance after chance after chance. Every time he got caught for doing something wrong, every time he got arrested, every time he got dragged in, she was desperately trying to talk some sense into him and be a role model that he had never had, because she, like most of the people in this small town where this game took place, knew what Jimmy's home life was like, and while lots of people didn't, this character did cut him a little bit too much slack, really. Also, right down the bottom, I've got wears old docs, flannel shirt, ripped jeans, will steal your cigarettes, will call you a fuck nugget. There was a lot of me and Jimmy, okay? So, in rather stark contrast to Moxie and Kuri, Jimmy's home life, not good. So Jimmy is literal trailer trash. His parents live in a trailer park in the crappy side of this town, which I think was actually an island. It was like an island town, and it's an area where everyone knows it's just dodgy and shady and a bit shitty, and his parents were awful. His father was a heavy drinker, his mother was too. They didn't really give him any attention or any care. They gave him food and a roof over his head, and that was pretty much it. And then the sort of typical thing happened when he turned 15, 16. Him and his father started to argue and butt heads and get physical with each other because his father was drinking and being shit and would always go on at Jimmy for not being man enough, not being tough enough, not getting a job, not bringing any money in. And then Jimmy would be like, well, you're not doing it either. You're just a bum. You're a layabout. And then his father would get physical and Jimmy would just get pissed off. And to Jimmy, this was the norm. He knew this wasn't what everyone had in their relationships with their parents, but he also thought that they were idiots. Sometimes when he was in high school, he'd come in with a black eye or bruises and stuff, and the teachers would try to help or try to understand what was going on, and he'd just shut them out because he thought that if he told them what was going on, it would make him seem weak and pathetic, which is what his father had been telling him the whole time. Like, you're not man enough, you're not strong enough, you're pathetic, you're weak, you're whatever. And Jimmy didn't want that dynamic with his teachers or anyone else at school, even though he really didn't have friends, because he pushed people away, he kept people away, he didn't want anyone near him, and that was all really to do with his dynamic with his family. So as a teenager, even while he was still in high school, Jimmy started spending more and more time just in his car and would stop going home. And sometimes he'd get caught sleeping in his car by the police, who would say, look, you can't do this, you got to go home, particularly when he was a minor. And they would say to him, like, is there a reason you don't want to go home? Are you scared? Are you afraid? It's okay, we can help. And he, of course, didn't want them to think that he was scared and afraid, so he'd be like, no, fuck off, and then he would go home. And the whole cycle would start again. So yeah, that was a whole mess of a family dynamic for poor Jimmy. He was borderline unpleasant a lot of the time, and the rest of the time he was just sarky and moody. Particularly at one point later on in the game, where all these other characters who were other teenagers from the town, they had all come together and they were all going on this adventure and finding all these monsters and stuff. And there was one particular character who was played by my wonderful person Kat. She was playing a girl called Cleo, and Cleo was part monster. She had Medusa snakes in her hair, and she had to keep them under control, otherwise they would turn people to stone. And she had a hard time growing up because various accidents and things had happened, and her parents had to take great care of her, and she'd had to learn how to really get control of these snakes. And at one point, this group of adventuring teenagers ended up having to go to Cleo's house and stay there and hide out and stay there for a while. And they saw this beautiful house with these two loving parents. They were a little bit quirky, but that just made them more fun. They had this library and this room, and they loved Cleo so much. She had a wonderful bedroom. They cared for her. They made all of her friends breakfast in the morning, even though Jimmy had, put his boots up on their couch and stuff. And that inexplicably made Jimmy really, really pissed off. And at one point it all came to a head where someone said something and then Cleo said something else to Jimmy about his attitude. And I don't remember what it was that Cleo or the other person said. It was something about families and parents or attitudes and monsters, something about that. I don't remember what was said, but I do remember what I said as Jimmy back, because it was very, very mean. So Jimmy snapped at Cleo and essentially said to her, I don't know why your parents love you, you're a fucking monster. And this made Cleo and everyone else really upset and pissed off, because obviously this is Cleo's biggest, deepest thing. She's a monster. She is a literal monster. She has all these snakes and she's been trying to control them all her life, and horrible things have happened to her. And Jimmy literally just said her biggest insecurity to her face and threw it back at her. And later on, this came up again, and Jimmy, having had a bit of a soul-searching realization about himself and his behavior and stuff, and he explained that what he actually meant was that he didn't understand. He said, you're a literal monster and your parents love you so much. I'm normal. Why couldn't my parents give a shit about me? And that was a very hard conversation to have in character, but it was also a very sweet turning point moment. And I remember that moment very strongly as part of that game. That was a very interesting thing to explore with the character of Jimmy, because really I hadn't explored having a negative family dynamic before, so it was very strange for me. And seeing another character have a good family dynamic, I thought, well, how would this character feel about that? So that was very interesting. As the story wrapped up and came to an end, Jimmy was allowed to hang out with Cleo more. He hung out with her parents, her dad in particular. They got along very well. He was allowed to stay at their house. He was allowed to use their bathroom and shower, because obviously trope coming up, had very poor hygiene because he'd been living in his car so much. And at the end of the story, he wasn't a fully changed character, but he was definitely a much happier and much more open individual. So yeah, bless him. Jimmy learned quite a lot, but oh man, at points was he an utter prick. I hope you spotted all the tropes. I like to play around with the tropes, even though I use them pretty much all of the time. And did you spot any other ones? Are there any other tropes? Were there similarities you can see between the characters that I did not spot or have forgotten about? Let me know in the comments below. And also tell me, what are your favourite tropes to play? What do you always put into your characters, whether it's in D&D, Monster of the Week, an RP, whatever it is? What do you always really enjoy playing, no matter who or what your character is? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, thank you for watching, my wonderful jelly spoons. Normally at this point I would tell you that you can support me on my Ko-fi or my Patreon. However, if you want to purchase things in my Ko-fi shop right now, I cannot ship to America. The UK Postal Service is still having a problem with that cyber attack, so please bear with me on that one. If you'd like to order things, please do so, but there will be a little bit of a backlog and delay on that one. If you want to just throw me support or get a commissioned video, because those ones I can send to you over the internet, then you can find those on my Ko-fi page as well from various different characters where I can do and say whatever you would like. Also on my Patreon, you can find pictures of the dog, behind the scenes things, voting, blah, 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 blah. Come and support me on the Patreon if you would like to as well. My Etsy shop will be open soon as well, I promise, with my bleach paint t-shirts and various different things like that. Currently, you can find them all on my Ko-fi page, but again, because I cannot ship to America right now, there will be a delay on things if you are from America and you order things. I am sorry. Alright, in the meantime, thank you very much for watching my wonderful jelly spoons. I'll be back next week with another episode of Monday Madness, and I think this week as well I'm going to try and record and upload the last few chapters of the Nine Eyes Never Shut fic, because I really need to give you all the rest of that. I am so sorry. And of course, please tell me anything and everything about the characters that you have created and played down in the comments below. I just really love hearing about people's characters and stories, so throw in as much or as little as you would like to. Also, if you have any suggestions for what you'd like me to talk about next week in Monday Madness, do let me know. In the meantime, have a wonderful rest of your week. Goodbye, my wonderful jelly spoons. Goodbye.